My parents sold our house to fund a trip the month I turned 18, leaving me homeless. 5 years later, my mom came to me in tears because Dad cheated on her. I laughed in her face and slammed the door. I'm 23 now. My parents disowned me when I turned 18. Ever since childhood, I had a very strained relationship with them and always felt unwanted. As a kid, I tried to earn their love and approval, but when I realized it was pointless, I stopped and focused on my own life. The change in me began in middle or high school. By my senior years, I only spoke to them when I needed something and tried not to bother them, not because I didn't want to repair our relationship, but because they made it so clear they wanted nothing to do with me that I felt awkward even asking for help, though I knew I had no one else to rely on. Dad was a pediatrician and Mom taught science at a middle school, so they generally connected well with other people's kids, which made it all the more ironic that they couldn't relate to their own. By high school, I decided I wouldn't seek their approval anymore. We led completely separate lives, barely intersecting. Dad came home late, Mom around the same time as me, but we never spoke, sometimes not exchanging a single word, just sitting in our rooms like strangers. I'm not exaggerating. It felt like I lived with strangers, with minimal contact. I also understood that if I wanted to attend college, I'd have to pay for it myself. On my 18th birthday, they made it clear they'd only stayed involved because legally obligated, and now that I was an adult, I had to fend for myself. They framed it as supporting my independence, but I knew the truth. They just wanted me off their hands and didn't care whether I succeeded or not. I applied to no colleges, choosing instead to take a gap year and try to save some money, knowing I needed funds to live, and without money, college was out of reach. So after turning 18, I began job hunting and quickly found work at a local supermarket. The pay was low, but I was thrilled to finally earn my own money. Unfortunately, my joy was short-lived. Just weeks after I started, my parents told me they planned to sell the house, and that I needed to find somewhere else to live. I had no idea they meant it. When I asked why, they said they intended to quit their jobs and travel the country with the proceeds. They claimed they'd been saving for this trip all their lives, and now that I had a job and was old enough to live independently, they had no more obligations. They were living their dream and giving me a head start to get my life in order. This put me in an impossible position. I'd barely started earning and hadn't saved enough even for rent. Even with roommates, I couldn't have saved in time to attend college the next year as planned, and my parents simply presented it as fact. If I didn't find somewhere to live, I'd be on the streets. I pleaded with them to wait a few more months so I could save more, but they were adamant and indifferent to my struggles, saying they'd waited long enough and wouldn't postpone their plans any further, that from now on, my problems were mine alone. Then my mother said, "My son, you're an adult now, and we're no longer obligated to take care of you, and the house is our property. We can do with it as we please. Where you live is no longer our concern." Those were her exact words, and I remember them to this day because they were so hurtful and humiliating. That day we had a terrible fight, the worst of my life. After that I never saw or heard from them again. I knew they would never reach out. I told them they were horrible people and wished them the worst because they fully deserved it. I cursed them without caring that they were my parents or older than me. I didn't care, since they didn't care what would happen to me. The problem was, although I'd stormed out in a rage, later I realized I literally had nowhere to go, no relatives who could take me in, because my parents barely kept in touch with their own families. They both lived apart from their kin, skipped family gatherings, and rarely appeared at holidays, so I hadn't formed close bonds with any of them. I hardly knew these people, so counting on them would have been foolish, and I couldn't even get to them since we lived in another state. I had a few friends from school, but by the time I left home, they were already in college. I didn't want to impose on them or their parents, That would have been too awkward. In the end, I decided to take a risk and called a coworker, who is now my wife. That led to a crazy chain of events, but I'm glad I reached out to her. We both worked at the supermarket. She managed the cosmetics department. We'd flirted since I started and quickly became friends, learning a lot about each other. I knew she also had a difficult relationship with her parents, so she would understand what I was going through. She was 2 years older than me and, like me, hadn't been able to go to college. Her father was a drug addict and her mother only cared about herself. As soon as she turned 18, her father moved in with his brother, and her mother said she could no longer provide for her. Since then, she worked hard to save money to study cosmetology and become a makeup artist. When I called and told her my situation, she immediately told me to come over and offered me a place to live. I was incredibly grateful, thinking I wouldn't have survived on my own, especially since it was quite cold outside and no one else could help me. Despite her tiny apartment and barely making ends meet herself, she chose to help me, which says a lot about her character. She took me in, and for the first few months I didn't pay rent because I was trying to save whatever I could. In return, I helped with groceries and utilities, and once I'd saved a bit, I started contributing my share of the rent. Before we knew it, we'd gone from friends to inseparable. I'd originally planned to work at the supermarket for about 1.5 years, but after breaking with my parents and realizing I had nowhere else to go, I started working harder. I'm still there, but in a much better position. I applied for a senior shift supervisor role and thankfully got it, as I was one of the most responsible and dedicated employees. That's how the past year went. I earn a decent salary, and my wife is now studying at cosmetology school while working part-time at the store. Everything was going well until last week, when my mother showed up unannounced. I don't know how she found me after 5 years without contact. The moment I opened the door, she lunged in to hug me before I could even react. I made the mistake of not peeking through the peephole first. When I collected myself and asked why she'd come, she'd already set her bags by our apartment door. She paused, looked at me sadly, and said she'd come back because Dad left her. Then she told me what she and Dad had been up to these last years. I'll try to keep it brief. They'd spent the first 1.5 years traveling around the country, then settled in California where they both found jobs and rented a place. But a month ago, Dad told her he was having an affair with a waitress at a restaurant near his office and was leaving for her. Mom decided he'd lost his mind and, after countless fights, chose dignity and self-respect, so she came home. Now she had nowhere to live, needed to save for a divorce, and with retirement just years away, didn't want to spend money on rent. So she decided to move in with me without even asking. Now I decided to repeat to her own words, those exact words she once told me. "You're an adult now, and we no longer have to answer for you. This is our home. We can do whatever we want with it without your permission, and you'll have to take care of yourself." Well, now she needed my help, so I told her she was no longer family and could fend for herself, and that this was my home and I could do with it as I pleased. I repeated her words with a huge grin and slammed the door in her face. Probably the most satisfying thing I've ever done. But my wife thinks I went too far and believes I should give my mother another chance. We didn't argue, but after seeing what I did, she felt I was too harsh and that I should at least think it over before flat out refusing her. Her own parents died in recent years, and I think that affects how she sees the situation. Still, I don't feel one bit of guilt for sending my mother away when after 5 years she came begging for a place to stay. Update 1. I talked with my wife about what happened. We didn't fight, but it was clear she was hurt. She didn't fully approve of how I handled it, yet she understood that this was my personal history with my mother and that I have the right to deal with it as I see fit. She felt it wasn't really her place to comment, so she held back her opinion, which started creating tension between us. Yesterday, after reading a few comments, I decided to talk to her again. I told her about my childhood, explaining that my parents always treated me like an outcast in my own home, and even then I tried to tolerate it, staying invisible so I wouldn't cross their path, and even that wasn't enough. They needed my life to be harder. That's why I felt no guilt refusing my mother when she needed help. After 5 years, she hadn't asked how I was. She showed up now only because she wanted something from me. I explained it all to my wife, though she already knew most of it. She apologized for her reaction. As I'd suspected, she was sensitive to the topic, having lost both parents herself, her father to addiction, her mother to a heart attack, so she'd misread my intentions. But now everything's good between us, and I'm glad we talked it through. Meanwhile, my mother is behaving horribly. She seems to think that hassling me on social media will force me to take her in, when all she needed to do was apologize and hope for the best. But like a true narcissist, she chose the exact opposite path, and of course everything went off the rails. She's been posting that her husband and son treated her with unprecedented cruelty, that at this stage of life she regrets ever investing so much time in us, accusing me of being just like my father for abandoning her when she needed help. She didn't even acknowledge what she'd done to me. If anything, it was worse. She created a fake account and started tagging me, my wife, all our friends and relatives in her posts, and I have no idea where she got so much information about my life, who I'm married to, where I live. It's creepy because I never shared any of this and neither my wife nor I post it. Our profiles are private, so how did she learn all this? Everyone she's tagged is trying to report her account to get it shut down, but we know she'll just open another one. Honestly, I don't want to involve the police. It's such a hassle, and my wife and I don't have time. But if she keeps this up, we'll have no choice. I really don't know what to do. It's unbelievably frustrating and infuriating. More than anything, I wish my father would take her back just so we wouldn't have to deal with this anymore. Her behavior is infuriating, and I hope it stays that way. I least of all want it to affect our real lives. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks, and my wife and I are still cleaning up the mess from refusing my mother a place to stay. She's escalated. Now she comes into the store where I work and just stares at me hatefully. She usually shows up around noon and lingers for an hour and a half, eyes locked on me with hostility. I don't care, and I've done my best to ignore her. I think it's the best way to handle it. I didn't pay her any attention all week, and it seems yesterday she finally realized scaring me like that was pointless. But true to form, she did the opposite of anything that might have earned my sympathy. Yesterday she didn't come to the store, and I felt relieved. Maybe she'd finally backed off. But when I stepped out after my shift, she was waiting by my car, and this time she didn't look angry, just upset. I even felt a bit sorry for her because she looked rough, worse than before. I have no idea where she's living now. Last I heard, she'd cut ties with most of her friends when she went traveling, and if she's trying to save money, she probably can't afford a hotel. I didn't ask, none of my business. I walked to my car, intending to ignore her and get in, but she stood in my way, refusing to leave, repeating that she needed to talk to me. Finally, after 5 minutes, I gave in and asked what she wanted to say. After all the nonsense she'd done, she suddenly burst into tears, full on hysterics, sobbing so hard she couldn't say a word. I started to worry a little. I don't love my parents, especially my mother, but I do have a heart, and I saw that she was really hurting. It was the only explanation for her behavior. I tried to calm her down and offered to let her into the car so she could collect herself, and then we could talk calmly. If it wasn't for her sudden breakdown, I wouldn't have invited her into the car. I think it's important to mention that after the last update many people called me every name under the sun, so let me clarify. I still haven't gone to the police or a lawyer, purely out of compassion, and a couple of practical reasons. It's a massive hassle of time and money, which not everyone has. That's why I haven't dealt with it. When she got into the car, she needed a few minutes to calm down, but then she finally began to speak. Since they moved to California, Dad started acting strange. When she learned of his affair, it crushed her, and she came back only because she couldn't bear being near him. Everything reminded her how badly he'd hurt her. She counted on my help because, honestly, she didn't have a penny. She even had to borrow money from friends in California to get here. She quit her job years ago when she and Dad began traveling and never worked again. In California, she'd been a homemaker, completely financially dependent on him, and now that their marriage collapsed, she had nowhere else to go. She'd long since cut ties with old friends, and relatives had written her off. I was the only one she could rely on. Desperation tinged her voice, but I felt only disappointment. I listened and told her the most I could do was give her a little spending money, but never let her move in. I don't trust her after what she put me through. She has no right to expect more. Enraged, she declared she didn't need anything from me, stormed out of the car, and slammed the door so hard I knew she was hurt. Update 3. My mother hasn't tried to contact me in nearly a month, and it seems she's finally gone. I don't know where, but I did discover how she learned everything about me. I had an old public Facebook account I hadn't used in years. Couldn't recover because it was tied to an email I no longer have access to, so I made a new profile. Unfortunately, that old account was public, and that's where she got my info. I tagged friends in photos posted from my other account, and many shots showed me at our apartment entrance, so she figured out where I lived. I did nothing about it. What's the point? She knows a lot now, and I'm nearly certain she won't try again. She tried and realized it was pointless and won't waste her time. I haven't spoken to her since, and honestly I hope it stays that way. I don't wish her harm, despite everything, but I don't want her in my life. A few weeks ago, her friends told me that after I refused her, she went asking them for help, but they ignored her. They said she'd snubbed them for years when they tried to keep in touch, and now they saw no reason to help. She'd been living in a motel near town for weeks, as she mentioned in her messages, but then she blocked them all, and they believe she's moved on and no longer needs help. We'll see what happens next, but I know once the divorce process starts she'll definitely try to contact me again. Update 4. Big news. Almost a year has passed since I last spoke to my mother, and I'm honestly surprised she never reached out. I assumed during her divorce, with no money, she'd need a lawyer, but recently I learned from some relatives that she's back with Dad. It shocked me, because when we last met she was literally devastated by his betrayal, and now they're together again. At my cousin's wedding I ran into a few relatives. Of course my parents didn't come, and that's where I heard it. I wanted to understand how they could reunite, so I talked to some aunts who, though not close, know all the family gossip. They told me that a couple of weeks after she returned, she gave Dad an ultimatum. Either he filed for divorce, which he refused, or she would do it herself and wouldn't spare him in the process. It turned out Dad had tried asking that same waitress to marry him, telling her he left his wife for her. Funniest part, she wasn't serious about him. She'd been seeing multiple men, and he was just one of the naive fools who fell head over heels. When she explained that to him, he ended things with her. And that's how my parents got back together. I'm sincerely happy for them. They're perfect for each other. If they divorced and started relationships with others, those poor souls would probably be traumatized for life, and who would wish that on anyone? So they're better off sticking together. My wife and I laughed about it for a long time. It seems things ended exactly as I expected. They became the family joke. And that's the end of their story. Let me know in the comments what you think. Did I do the right thing? I can't imagine another way to handle it. Thanks for watching till the end. Check out our previous video here, and good luck to you.